Table 110.34e of the National Electrical Code addresses the elevation of unguarded live parts above working space. Specifically, it mandates a minimum height of 9 feet 6 inches for such live parts. The question arises whether the area directly below the top bushing of a 34 kV substation type transformer fed from a primary metering structure with open wire constitutes workspace when the transformer's body occupies the space. The answer is no. The area below the top of the bushing is not considered workspace because the transformer itself occupies that physical location. The intent of the NEC in Table 110.34e is to ensure sufficient vertical clearance above areas where personnel might be present and performing work on or around electrical equipment. These working spaces are generally defined as the areas providing access for examination, adjustment, servicing, or maintenance of electrical equipment. Since the transformer's physical presence precludes access for such activities directly beneath the bushing, it is not designated as workspace. To understand this better, let's delve into the definitions and applications of workspace as outlined in the NEC. Workspace, in the context of electrical installations, is specifically allocated for the safe operation and maintenance of electrical equipment. It encompasses the space required for personnel to perform tasks such as inspecting, repairing, and operating equipment without undue hazard. The NEC specifies minimum dimensions for workspace, including height, width, and depth, to ensure adequate room for these activities. However, these requirements apply only to areas designated as workspace and not to all areas surrounding electrical equipment. In the scenario of a substation transformer, the workspace is typically defined around the perimeter of the transformer, providing access to connections, controls, and other components requiring periodic attention. The area directly beneath the high-voltage bushings is generally not considered part of this workspace, as the transformer structure effectively prevents access for maintenance or operation in that specific location. Consider the practical implications of treating the area under the bushing as workspace. It would necessitate maintaining a 9 foot 6 inch clearance above the transformer's body, which is physically impossible. The code's intent is to protect personnel from accidental contact with energized parts while performing work, and this protection is achieved by maintaining proper clearances in designated workspaces. The design and layout of substations must comply with all applicable NEC requirements, including those pertaining to workspace. However, the application of these requirements must be based on a reasonable interpretation of the code's intent and a realistic assessment of the actual working conditions. In the case of the transformer bushing, the fact that the transformer itself occupies the space beneath the bushing effectively negates the need to consider that area as workspace. Furthermore, the location of the transformer within the substation should be such that it does not impede access to other equipment or create hazardous conditions. Clear pathways and sufficient working space must be maintained around the transformer to allow for safe operation and maintenance. The proper application of Table 110.34e requires careful consideration of the specific circumstances of each installation. It is essential to understand the definition of workspace and to apply clearance requirements only to areas that actually provide access for work on electrical equipment. In situations where the physical presence of equipment precludes access to a particular area, it is not necessary to apply the workspace clearance requirements to that area. Let's explore related sections of the NEC to gain a more comprehensive understanding of workspace requirements. Article 110 of the NEC covers general requirements for electrical installations, including those related to workspace. Section 110.26 specifically addresses spaces about electrical equipment, outlining the minimum dimensions for working space in various situations. This section specifies the required depth of working space in front of electrical equipment, the required width of working space, and the required height of working space. These dimensions vary depending on the voltage of the equipment and the presence of exposed live parts. However, it is important to note that these requirements apply only to areas designated as workspace and not to all areas surrounding electrical equipment. Section 110.34 provides additional requirements for electrical installations operating at over 600 volts nominal. This section includes specific requirements for workspace around high-voltage equipment, including the minimum height of working space and the required clearances for exposed live parts. Table 110.34e specifically addresses the elevation of unguarded live parts above working space, requiring a minimum height of 9 feet 6 inches. This requirement is intended to prevent accidental contact with energized parts while personnel are working in the vicinity of the equipment. However, as discussed earlier, this requirement applies only to areas designated as workspace, and not to areas that are physically occupied by the equipment itself. To further clarify the application of workspace requirements, let's consider some additional examples. Imagine a large electrical panel mounted on a wall. The workspace in front of the panel must comply with the requirements of Section 110.26, including the minimum depth, width, and height. This workspace provides access for personnel to open the panel, inspect the components, and perform any necessary maintenance or repairs. However, the space behind the panel is not considered workspace, as it does not provide access for work on the equipment. Similarly, consider a motor control center (MCC) located in an electrical room. The workspace in front of the MCC must comply with the requirements of Section 110.26, providing adequate room for personnel to operate and maintain the equipment. However, the space inside the MCC is not considered workspace, as it is occupied by the various components of the MCC. In both of these examples, the definition of workspace is based on the actual accessibility of the equipment for operation and maintenance. The code requirements are intended to ensure that personnel have sufficient room to perform their work safely, but they are not intended to require unnecessary clearances in areas that are not actually used for work. In the context of the 34 kV substation transformer, the area below the top bushing is not considered workspace because the transformer's body occupies that space. This means that the 9 foot 6 inch clearance requirement of Table 110.34e does not apply to that area. However, it is still essential to maintain adequate workspace around the transformer to provide access for operation and maintenance. This workspace should comply with the requirements of Section 110.34, including the minimum height, width, and depth. In addition to the NEC requirements, it is also important to consider any applicable local codes or regulations. Some jurisdictions may have additional requirements for workspace around electrical equipment, and these requirements must be followed in addition to the NEC. Furthermore, it is always a good practice to consult with a qualified electrical engineer or inspector to ensure that the installation complies with all applicable codes and regulations. They can provide guidance on the proper application of workspace requirements and help to identify any potential hazards. Remember that the primary goal of workspace requirements is to ensure the safety of personnel working on or around electrical equipment. By understanding the definition of workspace and applying the code requirements appropriately, it is possible to create a safe and efficient electrical installation. The application of the NEC is not always straightforward, and there may be situations where the code requirements are unclear or ambiguous. In such cases, it is important to consult with a qualified electrical professional to obtain clarification and guidance. They can help to interpret the code requirements in the context of the specific installation and ensure that all applicable safety standards are met. The interpretation of the term workspace is crucial in determining the applicability of specific code requirements. It's not merely about the proximity to electrical equipment, but rather the accessibility and intended use of the space. The NEC aims to protect personnel during operation, maintenance, and inspection tasks. If the physical structure of the equipment, such as the transformer's body, inherently restricts access, the area is typically not classified as workspace. However, it's imperative to maintain adequate clearances around the equipment's perimeter for safe and effective operation and maintenance. These clearances ensure that personnel can perform necessary tasks without undue risk of electrical hazards. Consider the implications of misinterpreting workspace requirement. Unnecessarily large clearances can lead to inefficient use of space and increase costs. Conversely, inadequate clearances can create hazardous working conditions and increase the risk of accidents. Therefore, it's crucial to carefully evaluate the specific characteristics of each installation and apply the code requirements in a manner that balances safety and practicality. The National Electrical Code is a living document that is updated regularly to reflect changes in technology and industry best practices. It's essential to stay informed about the latest code revisions and interpretations to ensure that electrical installations comply with the most current standards. Furthermore, participating in industry training programs and continuing education courses can help to enhance your understanding of the NEC and improve your ability to apply its requirements effectively. In conclusion, the area below the top bushing of a 34 kV substation transformer is generally not considered workspace due to the physical presence of the transformer's body. The 9-foot 6-inch clearance requirement of Table 110.34e does not apply to that area. However, it is still essential to maintain adequate workspace around the transformer to provide access for operation and maintenance. Always consult with a qualified electrical professional to ensure that the installation complies with all applicable codes and regulations. Remember, safety is paramount when working with electrical equipment, and a thorough understanding of the NEC is essential for ensuring a safe and efficient electrical installation.